in your role at JPAL, you work across national government partners, tech and domain experts, researchers, philanthropy to set up data use cases across sectors. And we're all in alignment here. We need people with data expertise in local context to work on projects. So how do you think, based on our conversations last fall, new insights from the report, and your own experience, how can we develop purpose-driven data talent needed to tackle these challenges that are interconnected, like climate and health, which is something we're working on in India? What have you seen been effective, and where could such an effort go wrong?
Right, those are great questions, Perry. These are some of the questions we've been working on a lot when we think of research use of data and how that could be used for social goods. So with climate challenges, especially as we think about global challenges, what becomes increasingly important is the interconnectedness that you mentioned. And there are two levels of interconnectedness that I'd like to think about, and I'll give you a couple of examples as well. One is combining what we call a globally informed and a locally grounded approach to solutioning, which means you need the knowledge, methods, data that can be compiled across different contexts, different regions, and develop solutions that are locally relevant and that are using local knowledge and expertise. So one of the projects that we are engaged in, along with data.org, is the Capacity Accelerator Network, which aims to do exactly this, is to train local talent so that you can combine lived experiences of people in these regions with the methodology, skills, and data that is required, or data science skills required to address local policy and development challenges. And this, I think, is even more evident in dealing with climate challenges, where the interconnectedness is more and more evident. We know, for example, the impact of floods, not just on economic losses, but also on health, physical and mental health, as well as other socioeconomic considerations of communities, especially in living in vulnerable, marginalized regions in flood-prone countries. So we have researchers, for instance, who've looked at how we could use satellite data and advances in technology to improve early warning systems of floods. And as the Accelerator report points out, there's tremendous potential of using data to address some of these challenges. But what becomes increasingly important is how are these challenges applied for the social good? And this is where the local context comes in, and it becomes really important. Is one thing is to have the early warning system, but how does it actually disseminate in communities that have largely relied on personal networks, in-person information, or village leaders to tell them on what to do and how to act? So there's a lot of work that goes into say, how do we use existing networks? What should go into such messaging, which then enables communities to act to the information that is provided. And we have enough research that shows that people do respond to some of these solutions. Another area where I think the interconnectedness or intersectoral approach becomes important is, again, in designing solutions to problems that may emerge from one sector but have implications on multiple sectors. And what do I mean by this? So for instance, in certain parts of India, in one or two states, farmers adopt a process of burning crop residue. And this causes air pollution, not just in the region where the crops are burned, but more so in regions downstream. So which means large parts of northern India are dealing with severe air pollution during winter months, which then, as you know, has implications on life expectancy and morbidity. Now, the government has had policy responses which ban such crop residue burning. They subsidize equipment that can be used to clear residue. But the solution may actually lie elsewhere. So more recently, researchers associated with us are looking at how could we use this data using satellite images to see where the crop burning occurs, at what level, and actually think of the solutions from a behavioral economics perspective. Is because there are incentives of the local administrators in implementing penalties. There are incentives of farmers to protect the environment, and how could we move those things? And interestingly, there was a solution using conditional cash transfers, and the idea that came was to actually make an upfront payment, which was unconditional, which did two things. It improved the trust of farmers that they would actually get compensated or paid for taking a certain action, and it also helped with liquidity. So you can see that for some of these questions, you need people to come together. And this happens, as we've seen in a lot of the work that we do, is when we have domain experts combined with local practitioners researchers, methodology, and data science experts. And so that's when we understand challenges better and we come up with solutions that are actually addressing some of these challenges. Now, all of this sounds great, but like you rightly said, the challenges remain. And I think Bio talked about that. It's not easy to do and it's costly to do. And so there's a lot of investment and effort that goes in collecting data that can speak to each other to enable some of these intersectoral challenges. And I can talk about that further as we think through how to address some of these challenges.
Terrific. Thank you so much. And I love that you touched on trust as well as Bio did, because nothing can move forward without trust is a finding we had tremendously in our Recode report last year. One thing I'd like to probe a little bit more on is how do you get the local practitioners to the table? You mentioned the upfront incentives to the farmers, but as we think about, Data.org has set this goal by 2032, 1 million purpose-driven data practitioners. What are the ways you can bring people to the table to work on these interconnected issues?
Exactly. So I think shared incentives and aligned incentives, which we talked about earlier, it becomes important. One of the fundamental things I've always said is to think about use of data from the end purpose. What is the problem that we're trying to address? What is the solution we're trying to develop? And then look for the data that can address those questions. So there's a little bit of a challenge here. It's because when we think about intersectionality, how could mobility data from Facebook become useful? Or how could cell phone records become useful? And you often don't know what you're solving for. So it's important to align, I would say, the approach and align objectives to social good. So start from the use case, start from the biggest policy challenges or development challenges we're trying to deal with. And that actually becomes the shared platform, whether it is a policymaker, whether it's an NGO practitioner, a technology company, or a researcher, we're all solving a problem. And when you start from that, then what data do we collect? How can this data speak to other forms of data? What is the solution for it? How do we implement the solution? And a nice way to actually test this out is with evaluations and research, because that gives us a platform to design and pilot a few ideas. Some things work, some things will not work, but then we learn from it. That process of iteration, improvement, then helps us come up with solutions that everybody has a buy-in into. You've co-developed or co-created a solution, which is then also tested to know why certain things work and whether they can actually be replicable at scale.
Thank you. That's the locally grounded piece we're all looking for. How do we make sure that the problems feel clear and actionable to get people to engage in it versus, some global, effort that you're contributing to, but doesn't sort of change your day to day. So thank you so much for that.